Gosh, I feel a bit like a minnow amongst whales up here after all those CVs that were read out, and what an illustrious group and very experienced group of Vice-Chancellors and senior executives or senior academics do we have leading our universities here in Perth. So please give them another welcome. We know that universities are increasingly important to the future of Australia's and Western Australia's economy. We're increasingly looking to our universities to provide the skills, innovation and contribute to the export income the state needs for future growth. Yet, all Australian universities are currently under significant challenge. Funding is a constant challenge, arising most recently from changes to the quantum of Commonwealth funding and also to the condition under which that funding will be provided and how certain programs will be funded. This places pressure on each institution to seek more funds from elsewhere, including from full fee student numbers and from philanthropic and other sources. Today, we'd like to understand the unique WA challenge for our universities in responding to our expectations and to the pressures they face. We'd like to know how we in the room can both support and take advantage of the increasing importance that universities have to our future as a thriving society and a growing economy. There'll be plenty of opportunity for the members of the audience to ask your questions of our panellists, so please think about those. Think about what you'd like to ask our panellists. I'll ask a few questions for about 25 minutes or so, and then open it up to the floor to give you maximum opportunity to ask those particular questions that I know some of you are burning to ask. This year's Vice-Chancellors panel welcomes representatives from the WA universities we know and love, but we also welcome a representative from a university with a decidedly non-Western Australian name, Central Queensland University. So I'll start with a gentleman from Central Queensland University, Professor Davidson, and ask him to kick off in the answer to the first question. What makes Western Australia an attractive destination to study and for a university to operate? Are we attractive enough to international students? Do we need to do more to make it more attractive? Do initiatives like the West Australian Government's Education Consortium make a big difference and really help? And can business work with you to improve this? Please, Professor Davidson.
Thanks. No pressure. I've been in WA for 2 years. I am a Queenslander. I'm a Geordie Australian, but I'm a Queenslander. And I think one way to answer the question is I've been to many forums like this in the last 2 years, and I know that WA used to be way higher in attracting international students than it does now. And the forums I've been to, they've talked about limited student accommodation and the like. But as an outsider, I'm really enjoying living in Perth and WA for things like the climate, the proximity to Asia. There's all things you're familiar with. I'm just speaking as an outsider. There's a great park system here that if you like walking and you like getting out and about, it has a great live music scene, it has a great restaurant scene. It's a pity it closes at 9:30 on the weekend. But I think I'm probably not the best one to answer that question because you've done this well before and something's gone wrong recently, how the numbers have dropped off, that we're all trying to get our heads around. And in our world, what we're finding is that when we're on our international marketing campaigns, the big thing we get is that the students want to go where their tribes are. So we get responses like a lot of Indians would like to go to Melbourne because that's becoming, for us, we have 3,000 students in our Melbourne campus, 95% of them are Indian, and they just want to be, like everyone does, to be with their own tribe. So I don't know how you crack that in a new market, but I think my colleagues are in a better position to answer how we can get back to be a preeminent place for international students. In our world, in the CQ University world, we move forward on our point of difference being how we do things, not what we do. So, we've been in distance education since the turn of the century, and now it's called mixed mode delivery or supported distance education, which doesn't really apply to international students because they have to have 75% face-to-face. So we're just trying to work through how we can work with the City of Perth, and we haven't really started to collaborate with the local universities yet. We're still a bit of an outsider, a bit of a disruptor, but we've only been open for one term. So I think the answer about international students deserves better answers from people who've got more experience than me in the WA context.
Thank you. We might just go straight down the line from there. Let me ask Professor Terry now to address the question. She indicated to me over lunch that she thought this would be the question that had the most interest amongst the audience, and I know she's come very well prepared, as she always is.
Thank you very much, Rick, and it's great to see so many people here today, and I think that's what is one of the most wonderful things about being a Vice-Chancellor in Western Australia, is there is so much broad support for our university sector from within the sector, obviously, but much more broadly, and I think that's something that does position us very well. Obviously, international education is an area that we're all very committed to. I think, Rick, you answered the question very well. I think the biggest challenge for us in this space is making up for lost ground. It's not as if we haven't been a leader. If we go back to 2005, Western Australia was 10% of Australia's population, and we had 10% of Australia's international students. Fast forward to now, we're 11% of Australia's population, and in terms of university students, we dropped to about 6.3%. So this is a major issue. As the Minister has indicated, it is low-hanging fruit in terms of how we diversify our economy. We certainly, as universities, have appreciated and welcomed the state government's support for this area. We need an absolutely coordinated approach, and I think you'll hear from all of us on this side of the table. We are very committed to that, but we cannot do it alone. We have to work together with other sectors to change the situation around. Yes, student accommodation is part of it. Part of it is a student experience that is welcoming, that acknowledges the importance of international students. City of Perth and our local government layers will be extremely important to that. We need to build a highly visible global brand, and we need to be clear about what is distinctive about WA. We've got high quality universities, we've got a very good training system. We need to be able to articulate the distinctive student experience. Trevor's done a good job of that in terms of some of our positives. We're in the same time zone as many of the areas where we would recruit our students. So I think the coordinated approach that the Minister is leading is critical. My view is that we have $1.3 billion that currently comes in to this state from international education. We should be targeting doubling that, and that would take us up to the position we were in 2005.
Thank you, Professor Terry. Professor Taggart.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Look, I'm delighted to be here. I'm pleased to be sitting between a mental health professional and a psychologist. So
doesn't get any better.
I'm looking forward to a few prompts and during the afternoon. Look, I think there's some fundamental challenges for the sector, and I think the universities have started to address that over the last 2 to 3 years, and that's about collaboration. We need to put a united front up to the world that this is Perth Education City. I know that's an old term, but it's Perth University City. And Perth is the message, as the Minister has pointed out. We also have to have a great student experience. And it was delighted when I was acting Vice-Chancellor that the Governor facilitated a meeting between the Vice-Chancellors, and it happened to be that the two leaders of the governing bodies, one at Curtin and one at Notre Dame, happened to run the airport and tourism. And they got together, and now we have a reasonable and good quality welcoming for international students at the Perth International Airport. So that student experience is absolutely fundamental because these are our ambassadors. It's interesting to note that Bali is probably Perth's second biggest city, Western Australia's second biggest city, yet the students from Indonesia typically fly right over Perth and don't come here. So we've got some local challenges that are very near to us that I think we can address collaboratively. I think also the collaboration will come through research, and whether it's animal health, human health, agriculture, cybersecurity or whatever. I think the other important message is that we do have a top 100 university in this state in the world. We need to celebrate that and bask in that reflected glory. It is very important, the University of Western Australia to this state. I think the Minister's got it right in terms of the focus on China. We can do much better in that space, particularly with research messages about where Western Australia leads the world. The final point I'll say about a challenge is, probably wasn't helped by some rumblings around 457 visas at the state and at the national level, but employment is crucial for international students. And work-integrated learning is something that can drive future employment for international students. And even if it's not employment in Perth, it can be a great segue into their employment back in Beijing or back in Delhi. So I think there's some great challenges that we can address collaboratively.
Thank you. Well, from the top 100 rated university in Western Australia, Professor Freshwater, please.
Thank you, Rick. And as is usual for a psychologist, there were several questions in one. Obviously, you're trying to get at something. I would like to just reframe that question slightly and the several questions that were in there. We're in a context within which we're having to remodel the future of higher education. That's a given. And given that this forum is really around the economic prosperity of the state and the nation, and international education as a focus, let me just point on that for a moment, and then I want to come to the student experience, because I think this is really important. So if we think about the question, for me the question is, in the context of an industry that is a $22 billion export industry, the question really is, how do we turn an increasingly interconnected and mobile higher education and research sector into social and economic gain for the state and the nation? And as the Minister has already indicated, and as the panellists have already indicated, we can't do that on our own. If you turn to recent documentaries coming out of Europe, they are describing higher education as the new global economic war, which is really interesting. So we're in this particular zeitgeist where higher education and education itself is being described as merchandise. And we're turning out what are being described as oven-ready graduates. Things that we have to think about in terms of the context of the challenges that Rick's posed and that have been the content of the Minister's statement around international education, and clearly we can't do that on our own. The importance of marketing and branding. Perth, as a study destination, has already noted a study destination for quality of education, but also of relevance. And relevance means that, of course, we're educating those students for future employment, where the intersection of disciplines that currently exist and those that we don't know yet that will exist happen to meet. And so we have to be innovative in that space in terms of thinking around what our products are, a portfolio of products across the 5 universities that are differentiated but add value to the whole. In terms of the question around what businesses can do and how we work more closely with industry, there are already some good examples in this state. So CEDA is a good example. This programme works with industry with prospective students, and by the end of this year there'll be over 500 research projects. So we have some good models that we can build on. But what the Vice-Chancellors of the 5 universities have been talking about most recently are ways in which we can bring together our various areas of strength and expertise in 5 main areas, and we're going to talk a bit about these, I'm sure, as we get through the panel. Last night we met with Minister McTiernan to talk about our role in agriculture and environment, very important in terms of international education, particularly with China and India. We've also focused on defence, our strengths in marine science and marine engineering. The work that we're doing through the Health Translation Network, of course, is another area, and big data through the Square Kilometre Array and radio astronomy. The Minister had indicated that we need to have a focus if we're going to be able to travel internationally on delegations that are around the whole of what Western Australia has to offer, not the individual universities. And I think we're all working together in this regard to ensure that we can highlight those areas where it's not only about the students that we're recruiting, but about the excellent quality of researchers and educationalists. A final word on the student experience. International students tell us that what is most important to them is the experience of belonging and the experience of feeling welcome. We live in a very stable, secure society, and we can offer that. Nevertheless, it's still a challenge for our international students to feel welcome here.
Thank you. Professor Chapman.
Well, in the interest of time, I agreed around the table that the answer to all my questions would be, I agree with Debbie. But that's probably not enough, so I will say a little bit more. And the first thing I think we should probably look at is the marketing aspect of how we sell Perth, how we sell the universities. And to a certain extent, that does come down to money, and we heard from the Minister the parlous state of the Western Australian economy at the moment, and that there are limitations in what we can spend. But I think if we contrast the spending on marketing education, not just higher education, from this state last year, it was about 1.3 million, and in Queensland it was 7 million, in Victoria it was 8 million. Now, okay, so that they're considerably more, but I accept that those states also have the other advantages we talked about. So you might think that marketing is even more important for us. You might. If we look at how much the state spent on tourism, it was tourism marketing. I think it was something like 420 million. Okay, it got 8 billion back, but you know, for 1.3 million, we got about $1 billion back. So I'm just not suggesting that more money has to come from the state, because it doesn't have any more money, but I am suggesting of where we prioritise it might be worth thinking about. Is 420 million for marketing tourism fair when 1.3 million is used to marketing all of education? And I think we have to think about that in the consequence, in the context of where Study Perth might go, because I know that's looking at rebranding itself and rethinking how it does things. If we're going to do that again, we have to do it properly resourced, I think, this time. And that's just a question that we should, I guess, look at. I was very pleased that when the new government came to place, that one of the first meetings I was called to was held by Mark McGowan and Sue, and it was about international students. And the most rewarding thing about that meeting wasn't really all the people of a certain age who were not digital natives and really didn't have a clue what they were talking about, but was the student that we'd invited. Now, the student was an interesting one, because the reason that I thought she gave very good answers was that she'd originally come to Melbourne, not Perth. And then she'd come across to Perth, and she contrasted her experience of being in Melbourne and being in Perth. So when she was in Melbourne, regardless of what university she was at, they met the mayor, the city put on lots of things for them. There was a lot of things that made her feel that she was part of an international community in Melbourne that was really valued by the city. Now, of course, the universities put on their own welcoming things, and we really value our students, but that was something she mentioned, that when she came to Perth, yes, she went to her university and they recognised her, but there wasn't really anything that the city, that she discernibly found, was doing. And I think that was received well by the Premier and by Sue, and that things like that will happen. Because there is a lot of marketing you can do, but a lot of it is word of mouth. I mean, we have a lot of students from a particular country at ECU. In fact, we probably have 80% of the people who come from that country, and that's because they go home and say what a wonderful time they've had. So we really want to think about the soft power we get from sending those students back. I guess in terms of how we work with other partners, with industry, etc., this is where our universities actually, I think, work really well together. We are incredibly collegiate. I've been in many universities, many countries, but Western Australia strikes me as the place where the universities are willing to work much more closely than before and are less precious about a lot of things. So in terms of that, I'd say we have an open door, so come and see us, and we're very keen to work with you. But I think we've all realised the importance of international education. We all understand that pretty much the local market is flat in terms of student numbers. So if we want growth, it has to be international. And we're very keen to work with government, and all the universities here will do everything we can to do that.
Thank you very much. I've just got an eye on the time. If we're going to leave plenty of time for members of the audience to ask some questions, I think we've probably only got an opportunity for one more go-around with the panellists. So at the risk of being accused of being a psychologist again by Professor Freshwater, I'll ask a multi-layered question, but I'll give the panellists the option of answering one or several bits of the question. So we've talked about collaboration, we've talked about collaboration between the universities. A couple of you have mentioned that we can't make Perth and WA a more attractive international destination unless we collaborate. So this question is about exactly that many of the members of the audience here have tried, are trying, or are keen to engage with you in collaborative efforts to create more value. Are there particular sectors that you're interested in? And I know that a couple of you have already mentioned a few. How can any one of the organisations in the room engage with your institution? Do they write to the VC? Do they fill out a form? Is there a department that they have to call? What are you doing to reach out more to university? And what's the value proposition you offer to industry? There's a related element to this if we take a slight tangent, which is the whole nature of the future of work. If you're going to engage with industry, one of the things that industry people are most interested in is how the universities provide an opportunity for graduates to join their organisation. So if there's an opportunity for you here to talk about your perspective on the future of work and how that may help you to engage with industry, I'd welcome that as well. So why don't we do what we did before, but in reverse. Let's just go up and down the table. Professor Chapman, if I could ask you to start off.
Okay. I think the universities in Western Australia do work very well with industry and with lots of partners. I'll pick just a couple of areas in relation to ECU. First of that would be in defence, and we've had a very strong and developing relationship with Austal. That's going extremely well, and it's something that benefits both organisations in different ways. So, for example, research, we can benefit Austal with placements for our students, all kinds of things, visiting lectureships, a whole raft of different things. And the other area would be in cybersecurity, which pretty much every company here is interested in, given what's going on. And we have a spin-out company from that, which is doing very well. But when I'm at a meeting, and I was at a meeting recently where we had representatives from defence and a lot of industries and a lot of government representatives, I didn't feel I was representing just ECU. I felt at the table I could bring to the fore all of the potential that the whole state has. So if, for example, there was something that was raised that ECU didn't do, I could just say, look, we can do that for you, but it won't be ECU. I'll be getting UWA to do that, or I'll be getting Curtin to do the big data part of that whilst we do this. So I think, and I believe, that all of the Vice-Chancellors think in that way. We think of ourselves as, how do we market this as a package? So when you're talking about who should industry call, don't worry about it. I mean, this isn't Henry Kissinger, you know, when he said, well, I need to call Europe, who do I call? It doesn't matter. If you call me, I'll be representing the other universities. If you call Debbie, she'll be representing the other universities. Essentially, when you contact any of us, you have a one-stop shop, because the interest is to make the thing work. And I have a strong belief, and I think we all do, that all boats rise on the tide. So, for example, we need a really great, successful Group of 8 university, and it benefits me if that university becomes more successful, and it benefits the state because the state's reputation for education generally goes up. But it also benefits me if I work in collaboration with Murdoch, for example, on the Phenome Centre. So we've had academics who spend more time in Murdoch than they do in my institution. I don't care. As long as the research is good, as long as the outputs are good, and as long as it helps the reputation of my institution. So I would think there's a lot of misinformation out there about universities not being responsive. I actually don't think that's true, and I think this state is a really good example of a very responsive set of universities. So my answer would be, don't worry about who you contact. Whoever you contact, you'll get access to the full power of all of the university's research potential in the whole of the state.
Great, thank you very much. Professor Freshwater.
Thanks, Rick. So let me just underline what Steve's just said. When I was in London recently visiting the Agent General, he pulled out the paper on defence that the 5 universities had prepared, which he'd been working with, which indicated what we were all doing together. And I was able to talk to 2 other universities about the work that's coming out of ECU and out of Curtin. And so this is happening, and not just in the state. 3 points. The first is that I don't think we should underestimate the importance of the impact agenda and the importance of end user outcome of our work. So working with industry, we need to actually start with industry. And I think there is something that the government can incentivise around that. One of the models of actually supporting that sort of engagement is to put research and development funding into industry, which means that universities have to work with industry and government in accessing that funding. But aside from that, what we're doing at UWA, and I take the points that have been made across the panel collegiately around the importance of having a very strong GO8 in the region, and it is true that halo effect is really important. It's representative of us all. Is that through our university we've appointed a Director of Business Development. That Director of Business Development is working in industry and with us to identify areas within which we can support delivering the programmes, our portfolio of offerings to make sure that we're supporting industry needs, but also how we can support solving problems. The Indian Ocean Marine Research Centre is a flagship example of where we're working with industry, but the Department of Fisheries, we also have CSIRO in there, we have AIM in there, and when you walk down the corridor, as often was the case when I worked in mental health institutions, you couldn't tell who the patients were and who the staff were. It's a little bit like that when you walk through IMROC. You never quite know who you're bumping into, and that's actually what's meant to happen. It's not a clean hands approach. It's infection, and we need to be infecting each other in that way. The other thing that we're doing is we're working with CSIRO on the industry PhD, and that's really important. There are 2 GO8s working in that regard at the moment, and we're going to be the 3rd piloting that, and the plan will be to generate an industry PhD laboratory for international students.
Thank you, Professor Freshwater. Professor Taggart.
Okay, thanks. Look, I won't recap what Dawn and Steve have talked about, but just to emphasise a couple of points. PhDs are really important to universities, and we need to make business and industry see them as more important in their research and development activities. So the partnership between universities and business and industries to generate a greater pool of PhD students is really crucial. The federal government funding mechanism, categories 1, 2, 3 and 4, there were more prestigious category 1 grants previously, but now partnerships and funding from business and industry are valued as equal to the more prestigious ARC and NHMRC grants. So I think the federal government's moved in the right direction there, and as Dawn said, they want to make sure that universities have an impact. I'd like to touch on the future of work. I think universities, as part of that student experience and the outcomes, the graduate outcomes that our students present to the workforce are crucial. Murdoch's working on a career learning spine for all our undergraduate courses so that those students are ready for a career, not just one career, but multiple careers. And we're also looking at a minor in innovative creative thinking, because it's the STEM subjects, yes, that may control 70% of the future jobs that exist, but it's that innovation, creativity and difference in thinking that are really important to making sure that our graduates are ready for the future of work. Murdoch's big push in terms of partnerships with business and industry will come with our Knowledge and Health Precinct. So we've got 44 hectares of land opposite Fiona Stanley Hospital. So we're looking at $3 billion worth of investment in knowledge and health. And the health is not just human health, it's animal health. We are what we eat, so the health of animals is really important. So that investment will make the Murdoch precinct the 2nd biggest employer in the state, next to the CBD. I think the final point is that Murdoch's in Singapore. We're the biggest Australian university in Singapore with 6,500 students. So that's a crucial hub for Murdoch to speak to the region. We had the Singaporean High Commissioner in the state last week, and the innovation that Murdoch's driving in Singapore is crucial to the region and our connections, not only in Singapore, but with Indonesia, with India, and with China, Vietnam and Malaysia. So that's how I see connecting with business and industry.
Thank you. Professor Terry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rick, and that was a complex question, so we
Yes.
can answer any part of it. So as a
Please.
psychologist, I'm impressed. But can I
Thank you.
just say that this, I think, question absolutely goes to the core of, in a sense, what our sector is dealing with at the moment. And the Minister made reference to the broader funding environment in which we are operating, and obviously there's a Senate committee that is currently meeting to consider those reforms. If we look at Australia at the moment, we are, as other countries are, facing the impacts of globalisation, technology change. Universities are absolutely critical in this environment. Universities deliver the skills that our graduates need for the future. We deliver the graduates who will shape the jobs of the future, the new jobs of the future, and we must be a critical part of a coordinated innovation ecosystem. And that really, I think, goes to your question, Rick. And I mean, as the previous chief scientist, Ian Chubb, said a couple of years ago, it takes three to tango. Industry's got a role to play in ensuring we've got an integrated innovation ecosystem, understanding the sheer capacity that exists within our universities. Universities have a role to play, and I'll come to that in a moment, and my colleagues have talked about it, but government also has a role to play, ensuring that the policy settings support an integrated innovation ecosystem. For universities, it's absolutely critical that we are more penetrable in a sense. We are large organisations, and you will often hear industry partners saying, I know you do lots of interesting things, and I know I need to talk to somebody within Curtin, but I can't quite work out how to get there. I would take Steve's point, talk to any one of us, but we are doing exactly what Dawn's talking about. We have targeted engagement groups that are being put together to assist people from industry and government to find where the resource exists within our university. We also need to change our culture. We need to ensure that our internal signals and our reward structures within the university support collaboration, support industry engagement, support industry funding in terms of that being as important as the old Category 1 funding. We obviously need to equip our PhD students to work outside of academia. If you look in the Australian context, 85% of PhD students will say their aspiration is to work at universities. There's not enough jobs in the future, and they've got the most amazing skills. If you look at Germany, 30% of PhD students in Germany will be equipping themselves to work for industry. We have to change that. We've got to change the models by which we train our PhD students, and at Curtin we're absolutely committed to doing that. We need to simplify our somewhat arcane ways of managing IP. The IP, that can take 2 years and we're still arguing about it, and in a sense the opportunity's gone. So there's lots that we need to do there, and Curtin and the other our colleagues in the Australian Technology Network of Universities are also working to simplify the way in which we manage IP and contracts. But finally, and I think it's a point that the Minister talked about innovation hubs, Andrew's talked about it, and I was reading Peter Coldrake's book on universities a couple of years ago, and he makes a really important point that MIT actually derives less than 20% of its research funding from industry. Now, we always think of MIT being the most industry-connected university there is, but what's important about it, MIT, is that it's a genuine innovation precinct. You can't tell when MIT begins and ends, and all of the other industry groups that are attracted to being there because MIT's there, because of the capabilities that's there and because of the links. That is what we are going to hopefully yield out of the innovation hubs, the changes that were made to universities legislation, bipartisan support at the end of last year. absolutely critical. Murdoch's building an innovation precinct. UWA, all of the QE2 hospital complex around Joondalup and Edith Cowan, and it's exactly what we're doing at Curtin around what we call Greater Curtin, and also, as many of you would know, the Cisco Centre. It is about attracting industry. Come in, if you've got a problem, just bring the problem in, and we'll get our researchers to see if we can come up with potential solutions, and it may be that we can't. So we're quite able to say, no, we can't deal with that, but let's look at another way of working with you. So we've got to change the way we do things, and I think you've heard that from all of us. We're very committed to doing that, but universities have a role, industry has a role, and government has a role.
Thank you. And final word to Professor Davidson on this topic, please.
Thank you. I can't really add much more in the broad sense to what my colleagues have said, so I'll say some things about some specific things. So it doesn't seem so long ago that I would have said to my friends, I will never buy a mobile phone. I was going to resist that all the way. I've lost that battle. If you look at another technology like Uber, Uber's reconceptualized transport, and it's brought with it some problems as well, but it's great. To get on your phone, 4 clicks, you don't transfer any cash, off you go. The university sector is rife for reconceptualization. There are forces going on that we can't even contend with at the moment, but some of us will get left behind if we don't begin to think about how to do things differently, as our colleagues have said. So in our world, a specific example would be there's a rising trend in customers wanting learning but not wanting qualifications. We're too slow to give qualifications, but they want the learning today. So we have customers who want content, and they're quite happy to postpone assessment to a later date when they want the qualification, if they want it at all. And that changes the way we work because it raises difficult governance issues. We've all got to work with professional accreditation requirements and university government arrangements, but the way the world of work is changing through technology, the rise of casual labour, there are a number of think tanks around the world who are working on how can we make the conception of unemployment more palatable to everyone else, because there's going to be permanent, larger fixed sectors of the population that will be unemployed. Maybe they'll be asked to do volunteering. Who knows what the future looks like? But there are forces at play for the university sector where it could go like the TAFE sector, where it's full of different kinds of quality providers, and the ones who are more agile and can reconceptualize themselves to keep up as best they can with contemporary trends will be the ones who will be successful. And it's difficult times ahead. I don't have any answers, but these are the things that we are working on about how can we be more agile. Like for us, it takes a year to design and approve a degree. It's too long. You know, the world is changing much too fast for that to happen. We're working on a model at the moment where anyone online could apply to start a degree and start it 24 hours later. These are the things we have to contend with in the contemporary world. As my colleagues have said, we need to change, but it's a big job for the university sector.
Thank you very much. And so we now have an opportunity for some questions. So whilst you're thinking about your questions, please raise your hand and a microphone will come to you. Could you please also make sure that you announce your name and the company that you're from, and please make sure that you keep your questions brief rather than make statements. Whilst people are getting ready for that, I'll just take a lead from Professor Chapman and say, I expect all of you to be exchanging an enormous number of business cards today because, as he said, call any one of the members of the university, and there's lots of them in the audience today, and you'll have a direct line to the right sorts of people that you'll need to talk to in order to be able to engage more effectively. So I expect to see lots of business cards moving around. Let's start over there. Yes, please.
Murdoch University, Janice Dudley, Associate Dean, School of Business and Governance. The focus has been so far on international students in particular, essential to the prosperity of Western Australia. I'd like to bring it back to WA itself and the potential life chances and opportunities of WA's young people and their opportunity to contribute to a knowledge economy in WA. Now, obviously, universities aren't the only route to prosperity, but everyone knows that university graduates have greater opportunities than many people with other kinds of qualifications. Western Australia has the lowest progression from Year 12 to university in the country, and that's a real concern, both for the state and for the individuals concerned.
I think we'd just like to...
Yeah,
we
okay.
got your question, so thank you very much for that. I'll let the panellists answer that. Would someone like
I
to...
want to know what the panel believe, that how the universities can collaborate to do something about the lack of opportunities that young people in Western Australia have to progress from Year 12 to university.
Thank you very much. Andrew, please.
I'll answer that from two different perspectives. The first one is that, as Steve mentioned earlier, the Western Australian demand for through the uncapping of places hasn't had a big impact on Western Australia. So in the eastern states, there's been a much greater demand for higher education than there has been in Western Australia. So we need to address that, particularly in the light of the STEM and future jobs. You're right, Janice, that around about 50% of our Year 12 graduates are ready to go to university. And you compare that with Victoria, which is around 65%. So there's a lot of intellectual capital that's lost between Year 12 and universities. I think the biggest challenge is that, and the Minister's aware of this, that attainment in West Australian high schools needs to improve. ATAR is not the be-all and end-all, but we need more students doing those hard subjects like biology, like maths, like chemistry, so that they're on a pathway with those three subjects for a career in technology-based agriculture. So it's really important that the aspirations, we believe, are relatively high from these Year 11 and 12 students. We need to support schools in developing a higher attainment culture, and some of the work that's been done around improving maths performance of regional and remote kids is really important. I'm on the board at Coodingup College in Mandurah, and for the first time in 7 years, we'll have one student getting an ATAR. So our peri-urban outer metropolitan high schools have been in care and management mode. They need to move towards attainment in a much more targeted way. The other point is that the Vice-Chancellors have agreed that whereas all the universities try to recruit students from the broad Western Australian context, we're going to try and have each university have a priority area, so we don't overinvest our resources, and as Dawn said, we'll try and represent all universities when we go to Meekatha, rather than saying, I'm just from Murdoch University. So that collaboration will happen there as well.
Thank you. Some brief additional comments from Professor Terry?
I was just going to add briefly, and to reiterate Andrew's last point, this was something that was put in place in Queensland, a highly regionalised state and a large state, was that the universities essentially, when we're out there engaging in outreach and aspiration building, it's not student recruitment, it's building aspiration, building motivation to go to universities, that what the Queensland Vice-Chancellors agreed to do was essentially be responsible for different parts of the state. WA is an even bigger state, the challenges are really significant, and that is what we have agreed to do, and I think that will go a long way. It certainly had an impact in Queensland. I guess I would just add another point, and it's a really good question. My view would be for us to offer the quality higher education that young people in WA require, we need absolutely a sustainable funding base. International education is part of that. But my second, more substantive point is that we are training graduates who will, most of them, be working in a global workforce. So it is important for them to be at university with international students, to be engaged in projects, learning experiences with international students. That's as much for international students as it is for our students, and that is what we have a responsibility to do, I believe, in terms of equipping our graduates to be successful into the future.
Thank you. And Professor Freshwater,
I would just
briefly.
add to that the comment that Andrew and Deborah both just made about the regional strategy is really important. We haven't focused so much on the regional strategy and the regional students and our Indigenous students, but obviously this is a key area for all of the universities, and we're working together on that regional strategy. The other thing is that we have our schools strategy, so this is important in terms of not just going into schools, but it is about managing expectations and building ambition. And so that's something, of course, that all the universities are engaged in. There's a lot of the work that we do on campus, but it's our outreach and engagement work that really matters in this space. And interestingly, the Deloitte report that was released today on the public-private benefits of higher education has some interesting points to make in this regard. And I was interested that you use the term life skills, because it addresses that specifically in the personal characteristics that we're building within communities, within regions, and within states and within nations that then transfer into the global workforce. So I recommend looking at that if you haven't had the chance to already.
Thank you. And Professor Chapman.
Just very briefly so we can get more questions, but the core of the question goes really to the aspirations of the students in the school before they get to us. Now, we've got to raise those aspirations, and one of the things we can do is go into the schools. We can invite the people to our campuses, and we do that. I'm quite happy to represent everything north of the river. That's my territory now. That's fine. But
He's got a holiday house in Broome.
But the final thing I would say is that, we have to look at the way the system is rewarding principals and schools for the certain things they do. There are perverse incentives out there, and I know this from being on a board of one school, where it's actually almost better for a principal, for their league table position and other things, not to get kids to do particular ATAR courses. So I think we need to go right back and look, have we created a perverse system that's actually working against our students in school? And I think we have.
Thank you. Got a question over here.
Thank you. Lynn Beasley, the Chair of Study Perth Board. Thank you, Minister, for your presentation, and in particular, thank you for the industry science fellowships that are being established. I think it reinforces the comments by all the panel that closer links between these sectors is so important. And thank you, panel, for an absolutely fascinating discussion. My question is, of course, around international education. And let me first of all say how delighted we are to see all the universities working together, and I have personal experience of that. Thank you so very much. And I agree completely that we have to have an even better experience for our students when they come from overseas to be in Western Australia. But my question relates to, and to quote Professor Chapman, word of mouth. How important it is going to be for every one of our international students here, and they'll probably use social media to do it, to speak to their colleagues back in their home countries. We know for every student here, they probably influence 200, and I think that's an opportunity for us to grow even further. But I wanted to ask the panel about two other areas where I think we could be using word of mouth perhaps even better. One is the alumni of our universities. Do you think there are opportunities to make this work even better and to work as Team Western Australia rather than within each university? And secondly, I reckon if you ask people here in this room to say whether they've been overseas in the last couple of months, you'd get a sea of hands. Do you think there are opportunities to have more, so to speak, unofficial ambassadors, where we work more closely with industry so they promote Western Australia as a great place for international students as they travel overseas?
Thank you. I'll ask, just so we could fit in one more question, because we are starting to run out of time, I'll ask one of the panellists to please, if they may, on behalf of the others, answer that question, and then we'll be able to fit in one more, similarly with one answer from one of the panellists. Who would like to? Please.
I think more than 200. The word of mouth now is through social media. I mean, I think maybe you're still thinking in a non-digital world, but and we notice this particularly in China, in that they don't use Facebook, they don't use Twitter, they don't use all the things we do. They use WeChat, they use Weibo, etc. Well, there you go then. But you can imagine a student going back from China, going onto one of those social media platforms, saying how wonderful Western Australia is. It's going to have a huge impact. So yes, all of the things you say are correct. Every time you're out overseas, you should be pushing the flag out for Western Australia and for our university system. Alumni work, but in the modern world, I believe that you've got to work through social media. That's bang per buck. That's going to get you more than any adverts in the newspaper, any TV advert, any radio advert, social media.
Thank you. We'll take
Sorry, Chair, there's one little gap that we have in Western Australia, and that's about Year 11 and 12 students internationally being recruited to Perth for Year 11 and 12 study. I think that's an important area that we can develop.
Thank you. One final question. Could you make your question brief, please?
Sure. Jonathan Karapetis from Telethon Kids Institute. It was great to hear Minister Ellery recommit to the Future Health Research and Innovation Fund, and the sooner that money's mobilised, the better. I'm interested in the panellists giving us a kind of an objective assessment of where you think health and medical research in this state is tracking, and what advice would you give on the priorities for using those dollars?
Thank you. Professor Terry.
And I'm sure some of my colleagues on the panel will want to respond to what is a very good question. I think, as a lot of people will know in this room, this is one of the areas where Western Australia hasn't performed as well as it should, and we've got considerable strength in health and medical research. From 2000 right through to 2016, basically our success rate for NH and MRC sat at around 5%, far lower than it should be. We gained 5% off the pool, should I reiterate. So for us, it's absolutely critical, this fund, and I think we would all endorse what the state government has done with it, but we've got to be highly targeted around our areas of strength. We've got to build scale and focus in those areas of strength, and it will need to be heavily guided, I think, by the excellent work that's already occurring in the WA Health Translation Network.
Great.
So I might just add to that one of the parts of that question was around what do we need to do more of. And I won't repeat what Deborah's just said, but we really do have to get a handle on how we're going to commercialise what we're engaged in. We are not doing that well in health in this state, and we have the opportunity in bioengineering, biomed technology and in the biozone to do that. It's one of the things that the Health Translation Network has started to look at. That goes back full circle to the first question that we had around engagement with industry and ways in which we can partner much more innovatively to lend itself to commercialisation. That will put our Health Translation Network on the international platform much more firmly than it currently is.
Thank you very much. I think we'll have to call the afternoon to a close there and thank all of our panellists for their marvellous contributions and the very interesting and very useful way in which they've been able to characterise the work that the universities here in WA are doing. So please thank all the panellists for their contributions.